All right, everyone. I'm going to overview the first 20 years of OCR memos and guidance documents. I think it's pretty cool. The first OCR memo or memorandum came out in 1970. So I'm fully aware that some of you were not born yet. I was, but I was still pretty young and I had no idea what cool stuff was going on. But I'm going to give you a little bit of the language of this very first memorandum because from the very beginning, it's clear that they were aware, that people who were working on this were aware that students with disabilities, number one, were sometimes inappropriately identified as having a disability when they didn't have one, and that the requirements for the identification and education of English learners pertains to students with disabilities. So the way they phrased it was that students with civil rights are violated when they are excluded from effective participation in school because of their inability to speak and understand English. So this is the very, very basics that they're saying you violate students' civil rights. So this is explicitly based upon the Civil Rights Act, that if students can't participate because they don't speak English, we are violating their civil rights. And now here's the other part that pertains to special education. When they say national origin minority students, so students from another country are put into classes for students with disabilities. Here they're specifically talking about students with intellectual disability. If they're put in those classes because of lack of English skills, we are violating their civil rights. So I think this is really wonderful that from the very, very beginning, there was this recognition that we have to be careful. And this memorandum, this guidance from the Office for Civil Rights was affirmed by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1974 in a court case, Lau versus Nichols, that I'm going to talk about in a later video, but that has to do with the rights of Chinese-speaking students in San Francisco. There were additional memorandums issued in 1975, and that had to do with the Lau remedies from the Lau lawsuit, 85, 90, 91, and 2015. So there's been a whole slew of them. There's more than these, but these are some of the big ones. In addition, in the 1970 OCR memo, I'm going to read this very carefully. It says, where inability to speak and understand the English language excludes national origin minority group children from effective participation in the educational program offered by the school district, the district must take affirmative steps to rectify the language deficiency in order to open the instructional program to the students. So this idea of educational equity, that we might have to do something different in order to provide the same opportunity to learn, has been there since the 1970s. And as in an earlier video I mentioned, in the later Equal Educational Opportunities Act, they used very similar language talking about students having the right to access, and that schools must take a positive step. They must actually do something. There must be some affirmative step in order to help students learn and therefore access education. Additional important memorandums have to do include the 1975 memorandum, and the 1971 75, there were very specific things that were specified that school districts and states must do, but later that was retracted because they said that there needs to be autonomy in terms of determining local solutions to how this would work. In 1985, they emphasized that programs should follow what they call the Castaneda standard, and I'm going to talk later about this lawsuit. I mentioned this earlier when I talked about, not in this video, but in another video when I was talking about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, now reauthorized as Every Student Succeeds Act, that the newest ESSA reauthorization, Every Student Succeeds Act, has reiterated that it is indeed going to follow the Castaneda three-part standard. And 1991 was important because that specifically addressed special education programs. So throughout the history of these memorandums, there has been recognition that students with disabilities who are English learners, again, are still English learners, and therefore all of the guidance that pertains to English learners as a whole pertains to that subsection of the population. And I think that that's really, again, as I always say, it's pretty cool. All right, I'll see you in the next video.